Welcome to the podcast discussion for episode 107. Are you experiencing food stress and six foods to avoid? So, as usual, Susan, I always love to start about the inspiration for the title and how you came up with it.
Well, I only put six foods to avoid because they're the easiest ones to do. But I did it because I get a lot of calls during the week that people want to learn meditation. And I always ask them, well, why? Well, it'll help me with my stress, my anxiety. And I always have talked about, for the last 40 years, it's talking about diet, nutrition, and the critical functions of mind. Because my love was always in psychiatry, the mind, and the whole thing of how do we really change our mind field? It's all about mind. That's our umbrella here. And although meditation is a food for the mind, or it's a tool in which we can practice working with the mind, there's also literally physical food that we have to talk about. So you can't be eating foods that are causing a letdown in the brain function. Let's even talk brain function now, because there's mind and brain. They're two separate, but yet they're the same. So I came up with this title because people are stressed and they're not paying attention to their diet, and their diet habits are creating food stress. They're getting stressful because they're not eating the foods that are conducive to as I always say, a calm and focused and tranquil mind. So that's what this title I didn't switch around. Sometimes it takes me a few titles. This one I knew right away. Are you experiencing food stress? Because you and I remember, we're talking about that maybe a couple of weeks prior, and you said, hey, why don't you do something on food stress? There was a funny thing that we were talking
The
about.
ice cream, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I could. Don't let's not talk about ice cream. That's a whole topic. We'll show people how to make it. But are you experiencing food stress? Is food really affecting the critical functions of your mind via the digestive system?
Right.
And so, yeah, that's why I came up with it. And I came up with the six foods to avoid just because of what I know from my own research background. And I generally went over them, and not in too much detail, but enough so we just get an idea of where the thinking is going, and are we experiencing food stress?
Right. And not to scare people away, you also put it on the podcast. It's foods to think about or to pay attention to if you're going to feed your body.
Sure, because if our digestive system is running very healthy and functional, a lot of times when we get these foods that come in that have been laden with pesticides and genetic modification, then we can really digest that. But on a long-term basis, it's not that easy. And I always say, pay attention. Remember, I always say, do your own research, because the research of who you are is going to be different from me. But so this is for generalization that I wanted to put that out there, that people can just start in their own journaling. We always talk about journal your practices, journal these foods, and see where your mind can switch based on what you eat and what you do. So we could talk about them.
Right. And of course, the first one you mentioned is
Of
sugar.
of course.
Yeah, and I like sweet stuff. I also like spicy stuff, but in as you know, and we've talked about recipes and cooking because I'm an avid cook myself, so I have lots of little tricks. I like sweet things, but I don't like refined sugar, so I always use raw when I can, and I like to mix up the sweeteners. So I use raw sugar, agave, honey, even maple syrup because I can just use a tiny bit of each one of those to mix it up and have food-based sweeteners as opposed to that refined white stuff.
Well, even raw sugar is not really raw sugar anymore. And it used to be cultures would live on sugar, and the body and brain love sugar, even though anybody out there doing the keto is going to say, what, are you crazy? It's not. But no, 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 no. Glucose does not destroy the body. It's what's done to these sugars that's causing it. Because in the natural sugar cane is natural with, it has fiber. It has the minerals in it that are going to help it digest, like zinc, selenium, chromium, magnesium, all those that I mentioned in the podcast that get depleted when we eat sugar that's been adulterated. We can't even find, I don't believe on the globe, maybe, but I would doubt it. We could find the old pure sugar that a couple of hundred years ago. In that, using sweetener from the real sugar cane itself, before it was grown and changed in its growing abilities. You see, like pure wheat is a lot different than the wheat that's been infected with pesticides now, et cetera, et cetera. So sugar naturally was probably one of the most wholesome foods that you could even have because it contained all the vitamins and minerals needed for digestion. That means assimilation, utilization, and elimination. So sugar is good, but not the way we can even have access to it today. So raw sugar, the old turbinado sugars, are really not what we're talking about raw sugar. I just tried and I talked to you about it, coconut sugar, and it's not sweet at all. Because see, real sugar is not sweet at all the way we think sweet is. So all these new methods that are coming out, yes, they're okay, but there's nothing like the original form of sugar. And the reason why I put that on the list is because everything is laden with sugar. In fact, I don't go out to eat very often, very, very, very seldom because of that's people preparing the food and the kind of food. But someone said this restaurant's great, and I'm not your person that you'd want to take to a restaurant because there was I looked at the bread and I was wondering why is everyone eating the bread? Well, when I asked the person who was making the bread, they add sugar to the bread. I was amazed by that. And sugar, in other words, sugar, all our food is laden with sugar because it allows the consumption to increase, the sugar in soft drinks. And I'm not the guru telling you this. It doesn't take a brilliant scientist even to tell you this. We can see it with the obesity epidemic in our society and diabetes
And
and all of
metabolic
the
syndrome. Yeah.
metabolic syndrome, yeah, the diabetic syndrome, yeah. So all of this is a result of too much sugar, and it's because it causes calcium to be leached. Chromium is one of our greatest trace minerals in regulating our blood sugar count, for example. And simple sugars cause more chromium to be excreted in the urine. We know that. There was even a study, I think I mentioned 35% increase, a diet of 35% simple sugars increased chromium excretion 10% at baseline up to 300%. Chromium
Wow.
regulates blood sugar. I had blood sugar problems in my 20s all the time and in my teens, but I didn't know. That's why I became a nutritional biochemist. I mean, that's why I studied it because I watched my own body deteriorate with the diet that's provided in our culture. And, so sugar I did put on number one. Do you want to know really how I feel about sugar? But that doesn't mean I don't eat sugar because I do like to have a cookie and so I love, as we always speak about, ice cream. But I really try to process it and create as much as I can. And I don't overdo it, or I try not to overdo it because I do know the deleterious side effects of that, even with, the B vitamins, et cetera. So you really want to pay attention to that. So that was number one.
Right. And yourself, as you always say, your body is your laboratory. So pay attention and raise awareness and see how these
Yeah.
foods make you feel. Because if you're just eating it and not paying attention, then you might not be paying attention to the signals that are coming from consuming these foods.
Well, now, and I never noticed it as much as now, even if I eat a really good cookie, I'm exhausted within 15, 20 minutes. My blood, it just drops and I'm tired. You ever find that when you eat sugar? You just get totally exhausted.
Yeah, which is why I try to make them myself so I know exactly what's in it, how much sugar is in it, and I try to keep it minimal, which is why I would like to mix it up, using dates or something natural to sweeten it instead of adding a bunch of white
Right,
stuff. Yeah, so I don't
right.
even have the white stuff. I just add
Yeah,
a
I don't
little,
either.
yeah, a
Right.
little bit of maple syrup or some sweet thing like the date or something. There's a lot of recipes. As you know, I dabbled in keto for a while just to try it out, and okay, it was a little too much. As you say, mono diets aren't good, so you have to bring balance into it. And that was one of the things, no sugar. I'm like, okay, that's fine for a while, but then bringing it back. Okay, I like these sweet things, and I do like to, in moderation, of course, is the best.
Yeah. And pure sugar, and I say pure, unadulterated by human beings, at one time was a key ingredient not causing disease. But that's long since hundreds of years,
Right.
maybe even 100 years. It's a long time. I don't know how long when white sugar got started, but it's
Okay.
been quite a while. So,
We'll have to do a podcast episode on that. Okay, so moving on
okay.
then, the next thing was artificial sweeteners, which I don't like myself. Even the natural ones like stevia, they're too sweet for me, and I just don't like it.
Well, anything that's artificial, I find, is not, it doesn't cause the vibration quality that's needed in the body. And artificial sweeteners, we've known people have headaches, metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease. There was once when I first started nutrition, that had to be at least 30, 40 years ago, 40 years ago. And when I first got started, and I was working with private clients quite often, I used to say, don't even put the sugar that even that taste is going to send a signal to the mind and signals the brain. The whole thing together will create a response. We have aspartame in 6,000 foods and prescription drugs. Could you imagine? Over the counter drugs? Everybody wants this sweet. So we've become endemic with sweet. And because it's fake, what it does is it creates a disturbance in the natural intelligence in the body itself. And it's also toxic. And we're much better off paying attention to that. Just, studies suggest that artificial sweeteners like sucralose, aspartame, saccharin, forget that. They actually increase our appetite, and that's what I was getting at, because it's still that sweet taste that starts, and it disrupts our gut health. So we want to keep them out of our diet. We can use stevia, fresh fruit, raw honey I use that hasn't been boiled, maple syrup, date, like you had mentioned. They're all really great. Dates are fantastic, but there's certain kinds of dates. Again, I will do something on dates because I did an experiment with dates. And when your taste buds are clean, you can really taste something that's off in food if it's not polluted. So,
Yeah, I'll have to say one of the biggest benefits I got from going keto was elimination of sugar for months. And actually, I liked that part of it. Now I'm not 100% keto. Went back to a more balanced diet. But what it did
yeah.
is eliminating sugar for months. I came back to it, and sometimes when I go into the office at work and they have donuts, I can smell it, and it doesn't smell good anymore. Where they used to smell, you get the Homer Simpson drool donut, but now it doesn't smell good to me anymore. Which means the addiction part, which we've talked about before, you get addicted to it, and you don't realize, and you don't have awareness of the impact of the sugar until you get rid of it, and like, oh yeah, I don't miss it anymore.
And that's very true. I had conducted fasts. My When I was in graduate school at Columbia Medical School, I did work with fasting. That's when it started, and I used to conduct fasts, and I have journals actually, notebooks on conducting 3-day fast, 10-day fast. I've done a lot of work on fasting. That was even the subject of my later research work on starvation, and I did it with cancer and fast growing tumors. So I conducted the fast on myself. And I can tell you, when like you found in the keto diet, when you're off sugar for long enough periods of time, when I would go back, it would taste bitter. My body didn't want it. But the mind is what lures us many times and says, oh, just have a little bit and it won't hurt you. And it's addictive. And, there are those that say that it was created to be addictive so that more would be bought. But that we don't want to go into that. What's the word you use? Rant or something?
Right,
That
right. We don't
we
need a
don't,
rant.
we
don't,
don't want to go into that, but we
don't get
must
us
pay.
started.
Yeah, right. Don't get me started. And so, the we have to really think about that and just keep it out. So the keto has very great benefits, especially for people with metabolic syndrome. But on the other side, when we're utilizing animal protein so much, nobody's really seeing what the downside of that is with, dehydration, kidney changes, and not to say what we're doing to the mind field, taking on all that energy field of the animals that we're ingesting,
Right.
and
Well,
how they lived and how they were taken for food.
right. Well, that was the other thing I learned from keto too. Is number one, too much sugar. Number
Yeah,
two, I wasn't eating enough fats, and I'm talking about healthy fats, so now I've
sure.
increased that. Now back to balance. Okay, I'm going to eat more avocados and olive oil and nuts with healthy fats and omega 3s and things like that.
Yeah, really makes a difference. So we all learn. And, there was I wanted to do this early on. I used to mention this where food sadhana, we use our food as our practice because food really reflects, it's one of the four primitive fountains, and it really reflects a lot about us. The foods we select, it tells us what our body's craving or not craving, what our mind is craving or not craving. How we approach food tells us the way we think. Are we calm? Are we agitated? And you know, even training animals, I always bring up the dogs. I had one dog that was just so dainty with her food. She would take it, she would leave it, not leave it. And then she was a guard dog by breeding, but then I had a hound who he would see food, he would dream food. He would maybe take my arm at the same time. Not that he would do it intentionally, but he got so excited. It really tells you the different breeding. One is a hound, one is a hunting dog, and one is actually a dog for a working breed, as they call it, and used for that. And you can even see the difference in the breeding. So, as a human being, many of us we can pay attention to those inner cues. Are we approaching the food voraciously? Are we approaching it with skill? In America, they pile the plates really high in restaurants. If you go to Europe or to maybe a finer restaurant, you're going to have a little bit of food. It's more of you're enjoying the taste. And I've been in both places where I want to inhale a plate of food versus not. So I'm not judging here anyone, but it really tells us food and our behaviors around our food tell us our approach to food.
Right, and that's one of the tricks I have too. I mean, I used to love to inhale a huge bowl of pasta, which, as we know, is a carb, which basically boils down to sugar. So I don't do that anymore, and I do have the little plates now, and I like to be more gourmet about the foods, eat less, higher quality, better prepared foods.
I still have that bowl every once in a while. If I've done over exercised, or if I run out. And when I
Oh,
used to
sure.
come off from riding waves, you're out there 3 hours, 4 hours. I'm saying, where's the next carb? Because our brain feeds off of that. It takes a while for the keto. You know, we have to really do balance. There's no, and what people are trying to do now is balance the other extreme. So we had all these carbs, and that was number three, right? Processed carbs.
Right.
We have all these carbs and refined carbs that we have, and then we're now going the opposite with keto. And let's not even call it keto, just a heavy animal protein based diet. It's like if you eat eggs in the morning. When we were kids, when you'd have eggs, uh, usually you have orange juice with it. We always want to offset. The body wants to go into homeostasis. Remember, I've said that over and over. So when we eat something and we're too extreme, you will find that the craving will come if you're clean enough. The craving will come for something that might benefit that to create the balance.
Sure, and that's there are different definitions for keto. So you're right, and
Yes.
some are high animal fat. My definition is basically low carb, high fat, and adequate protein. So the protein source can be plant based as well.
Well, the whole idea with keto is the ketone bodies, and ketone bodies start happening in the body when the body doesn't have any more glucose that's stored in the liver that's
Right,
being
right,
secreted out and all of that. But so I like your idea of because that's what I follow. Uh, I have a grain-based diet
right,
with legumes, and when you're in a vegetarian diet, so when you're doing that, you it's harder to eat sugar and get away with it
right.
than if you're on a heavy, or let's not even use the word heavy, a meat-based diet, because you're already in the carbohydrate world as a vegetarian. So just a little bit of that I have found can really slip you into an insulin, whatever. I could become very stupefied very fast with just eating that cookie. And that might be why. Some
Right.
people can eat cookie if they just ate a meat dinner, right? And then they ate a cookie. They're not going to see the effect if I'm eating carbohydrates with, say, lentils or mung beans and rice. I do the khichdi diet all the time. And so when I'm doing that, just even a slip of a cookie will send me into a coma of wanting to go to sleep, truly.
Yikes. Okay. Well,
So, yeah.
anyway, let's keep it moving. So the next thing is caffeine. I know you and I can talk all day about food and recipes and foods that are
Yeah,
good
we
for
might
you,
have to
foods that are
just do
bad for
that.
you.
Well, the more questions we get in from the, if our community brings in wants to know about food, yeah, we can go. I spent the first 20 years just doing that. So
Wow.
yeah, and between you with all your experiments and you've been cooking and yeah, we'll do it. So yeah, the excess, I said excess caffeine. I didn't just say caffeine.
Right. I'm glad you
Yes,
put the qualifier of excess because I
yes.
love my morning coffee, as you know, and I even do the bulletproof, which is because of the keto. I learned about this bulletproofing method where you add fats into the coffee, which I really love. That came from the Tibetan yak tea or something where you
Yeah,
add,
which is really an ancient practice
right.
with it's very ancient and
I
of
love
course
it.
our and it was brought to mainstream and the I'd put excess because a little bit of caffeine, it depends on where your nervous system, again, we're talking about nervous system. When I was younger, I used to drink espresso. My family's from Italy, so espresso was, I used to love espresso. But what had happened was it was too stimulating for my meditation. And there is a difference between drinking tea, the caffeine in tea, versus the caffeine in coffee. And it one is secreted faster into the bloodstream. The balance is a little bit different. So again, it's your experiment where you want to utilize it. And a little bit, I use it in chai. Chai automatically has the fat. You see the yak butter tea, which
Sure.
I've had, by the way. And so it's the fat's already there, so it modifies how the caffeine is going to affect the nervous system. Again, the greatest chemists are the people who prepare food, and they're the cooks and the preparer of the menus. And they're great chemists because they know a little bit of this, a little bit of that. There's a balance. And so we have to look at it. What I was talking about is I remember I had some people here helping we were redoing some they were workers and they asked me to go buy this. I can't even remember it. It was in a can. And when I looked at the ingredients, it had caffeine, it had ephedra, it had all these things in it. And I wondered how a person could stand up after that. They were heavy, strappy kind of people, but their minds were spinning out of orbit. And it's because they were overstimulated. We could overstimulate ourselves very easy. And that's why I put excess caffeine. Like green tea and black tea, for example, I do better with a black tea rather than a green tea. That's why I always stress in everything I say, do your own research. I have a lot of experience. I have a lot of chemistry behind me. I did my PhD in nutritional biochemistry, but that doesn't make me, I can give you ideas, I can talk about it, but you ultimately are the genius of your own being.
Right.
Don't rely on somebody else to tell you what to do or not to do. I can give you some ideas, and then you go back to your drawing board and use your body as your laboratory, however you want to say it, and allow that to take place.
Sounds great. And by the way, I also make bulletproof my chai tea and my assam. I love all three of those. So we'll have to start talking about those possibly in a different playlist or something like that.
Okay.
And so the next item on the list was the trans fat.
And trans fat's old. And I always say to people, and I'll use my hands, when you have a trans fat, fat's usually when they lay down into the lining of the, let's say, our well, fat is what insulates our brain. So when a natural fat lays down, it would look like this. It has structure, right? Form. It has, can you see that okay?
Yep, I can
I
see.
don't, okay. So it has the form. And when it's a trans fat, it's going to be, it doesn't have form, so it's artificial. It's like this. So what happens is they stick to each other. There's no space between for energy to flow. And that's the best way I explain it. So trans fats do this. Regular natural fats do this when they lay down structure in the linings of where we need neurotransmission to take place, for example. I'm making it simplified, but I wanted to give you an idea. So it's already off the market now, trans fats, but we still have to pay attention to it because we just must. It might be slipping in certain ways. and just pay attention to that and where we're going with that. So I always say avoid the artificial stuff. Just avoid it. Trans fat we know is from partially hydrogenated oil. Anytime you see partial hydrogenation or partially hydrogenated, don't buy that product. That's what I would say. Margarine, shortening, any of that. Yeah, because there are good fats and bad fats, and we all know that. And I mentioned that. And trans fats promote diabetes, cardiovascular disease. We know it does a lot. And not to say what it's doing to the brain in dementia and everything else.
Right. And of course, the worst thing is when we combine all of these things, right? Too much sugar, too much trans fat, and
Right.
adulterated foods, highly processed foods. When you get it all in one bomb, in keto, they have fat bombs, right? So you eat good
Right.
fats. But these processed bombs are just crazy. But let us not get started into a rant.
Well, and also we have to also think, we could do keto, we could do grain, we could do any of that. I do have to say, this isn't part of the podcast, but you could have the best diet in the whole world, the most natural foods. And if you're stressed, you're poison. You're eating poison. It's as simple as that. You know, I do want to say, so that's what I would say would be a take home for that. You always want to be, you can eat that beautiful diet, what to eat, whole grains, vegetables, legumes, fruits, vegetables, uh, whole grain or no grain cookies, sprouted breads, and anything that's non-adulterated, and have the and minerals that you need to do the job without depleting the body, because it's a multi-billion, it's like probably a 70, $80 billion industry now, this whole foods, special foods, and all of that. But a sound mind, a mind that's calm, clear, and tranquil, will give you far more benefits than anything. But you must also eat good food too. So food is not to be negated, but you want to have that food, but you also want to combine that with a lifestyle that's based on love, compassion, and just gratitude, and not feeling stress. Oh my gosh, fear, worry, agitation. That'll kill you. That's food for the mind. That's another whole episode of something. But the food for the body and food for the mind, they go hand in hand.
Sounds great. Well, as usual, thank you so much for the discussion about your podcast. And this was episode 107. If you haven't heard it, check it out on the podcast. You can listen to it on YouTube or whatever your podcast app is. So we'll see you next time.
Thanks.